Hello, and thank you for joining me once again. I am reading The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teaching of Atlantis by Jon Peniel. I am on chapter 10. I've done part 1, and this will be part 2. I believe it's going to end up being in 3 parts, okay? I do not remember exactly where I left off, so I'm going to start on page 132 at the section of the free will of others. Okay? And a little reminder wouldn't be harmful at all. Okay? So sit back and enjoy me reading The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis by Jon Peniel. The Free Will of Others. Later in the day, Rousseau, one of the other adept monks, revealed more of the teachings on free will, including some on its intricacies as it relates to others. The issue of free will is involved in 2 primary tenets of the children of the law of one. First, honoring the free will decisions of others is considered vital and absolute. The only time one should interfere with another person's free will is when the other person is inflicting their will on someone else. In other words, if someone is forcing someone else to do something against their will or harming someone else against their will, we can intervene without breaking universal law. But when it does involve an infringement of someone else's free will, it is a very different situation. Universal law dictates that we are not to interfere with the free will of others, regardless of whether or not we think their actions are wrong. Even if we think someone is going to harm themselves, we should always honor their right to do so. Even if we know for certain something is wrong or the person will get hurt, other than warning them about the effects they are causing, we are not to interfere with their freedom. Our free will. The other tenet is recognizing and utilizing our free will. You have free will. It sounds simple and obvious, but it is not really accepted by most people. When you truly realize that you have free will, it empowers you totally. But it also makes you responsible and gives you responsibility. Realizing your free will gives you the responsibility of being the main creator of your life. Realizing your free will gives you the responsibility of choosing between the powers of light and of darkness, between selfishness and unselfish love, between your separate self and God. Because most people really don't want to take responsibility for what happens with their lives. They don't really want to truly accept the idea that they have free will, yet they are still using their free will, to make these choices all the time, even if they supposedly do it unconsciously. And of course, taking the unconscious way of choosing will almost always end up with the choices being made in favor of the dark, the selfish. You can take a road to anywhere, and anywhere you are, you took a road to it. The next day, we began learning more about how the use of free will and universal law create various destinies and the paradox of it all. Having free will means you have the ability to choose the direction you will go on the path that lays before you now. By choosing your direction, you bring experiences into your life. This is where free will interacts with the universal law of cause and effect. Have you ever heard, have you ever said to yourself, I didn't do anything to deserve this, or why is this happening to me? Wallowing in self-pity with such attitudes is not only fruitless, it is destructive. Thinking that someone else or something else is responsible for your experiences is a trick of the separate self, an invasion of your own responsibility. You are never really a victim of circumstances. Where you are at right now is where you have come to through the effects of your actions. We are all cosmic farmers. All is subject to the universal law of cause and effect. You reap what you sow. A plant you water and feed will thrive. The one you do not will die. Take a good broad look at the history of this planet, and you can see this law in operation in all things. The word karma is often used to describe effects that are due from causes that have been initiated. For example, getting killed could be called your karma for murdering someone. Sometimes karma is more subtle or complex than that. Being poor may be your karma for burning a village. Those who have been trained in prophecy and are at one with universal consciousness have fully realized and understood the law of karma, and can also know the details of such things if they need to, if necessary, in the flow of universal will. When your personal wants and desires have your attention, you are focusing on and empowering your selfish, separate self, and thus thinking and acting from the separate consciousness. When an entity acts thus, it acts in a selfish way, and a negative cause is put into action. And the reaction brings its negative effects. Likewise, when an entity acts in an unselfish, loving way, a positive cause is brought forth and positive effects result. What have you created in your life and the lives of others? When you initiate negative causes, you could be said to have accumulating negative karma. When you get a negative experience coming into your life, a karmatic payback could be said to be taking place. The same with positive. Positive out, positive karma. Accumulated positive karma payback. I must interject here that karma is often misunderstood by people who really haven't studied or understood it. I knew a lady who vehemently insisted that she had great karma. And her belief and proof of this was solely based in the fact that she drove a new Cadillac and owned 2 houses. The fact that she had to see a chiropractor every day for years because of an accident she had in a Cadillac had nothing to do with her karma, according to her. She was also a very selfish woman who sought to hurt anyone who didn't give her what she wanted. Having wealth and ease is no indication of good karma. Also, Just because something awful happens to you doesn't mean that you have bad karma, or that the event is necessarily a karmic payback for a negative thing you have done. Oddly enough, karma is not the only thing that can be behind an apparently negative or positive event. Negativity seeks positivity, so it can neutralize its instance. I read that wrong. Negativity seeks positivity, so it can neutralize itself. Look at the lives of the great beings of history, the saints and teachers, for instance. Would you say that because they were persecuted, tortured, and murdered, it meant they had bad karma? No. Nor was it that they had negative thoughts that drew it to them. The fact is, their very positive natures drew such negative response. Because this world is ruled by negative, selfish, separate selves. The greatest beings have suffered the most. This also occurs because the universal spirit forges its best tools in a fire. To paraphrase an old saying, God falls hardest on those he wants the most. The bottom line regarding the teachings on making sure that all your actions are accumulating good karma is this. You must surrender to universal spirit and following the guidance of universal will. More about this later. So, how should we deal with bad experiences we have in life that aren't because we're saints? The teachings say that when a bad experience is actually a negative karmatic payback taking place in your life, taking the form of a apparently bad event or a challenge, it is giving you a chance to learn from your mistakes. As Zayn said to me, how do you react, your choice, to what exists in and comes into your life now? The best way for a person to react is to see the lesson in the experience. Realize what life is communicating to you through this experience and change. Such a change will ensure that the mistake will never be repeated, and thus your future nows will be different. Free will and the mind. Mind is the construction worker of our lives. Zayn told me I could attend a special series of lectures relating to my new studies, and he recommended it strongly. It was quite an honor because they were to be given by Michael and only attended by elder monks. Michael was very old according to Zayn, far, far older than 100. Yet he only looked about 65. I don't think anyone really knew how old he was, but speculations ran quite wild. The ancient teachings indicated that with a combination of diet, meditation, and energy techniques, a lifespan could be stretched like a rubber band. And that lifespans of 800, 900, or older were not only possible, but should be the norm. Even the modern Bible indicates average lifetimes were that long for many of the characters in the Old Testament. And now, in recent years, scientists are claiming this is a new possibility with the right diet, supplements, and stress management. But I'm getting a bit off track. As the head of the monastery, Michiel was more of an adept monk. If we had been Catholics, he'd been our Pope. If we'd been Buddhist, he'd been our High Lama. Regardless of his youthful appearance, he was very weary and chronically ill. And these sessions were a great strain on him. Because of his position in the order and his health, I rarely saw him. But even though he was in great pain and was so very old and weary, in the very few interactions we had, he was still very kind and caring and seemed to have a particular affection towards me. During this lecture, he presented some of the Atlantean children's teachings about aspects of the mind, separation, and free will. As I'm sure those of you here have all heard before, our being has twofold and threefold properties. One of these is that we are a combination of spiritual, mental, and physical aspects. With the mental realm being dominated by a brain that is divided into two very different and often opposing ways of looking at things. The mental realm is influenced by the other two aspects of our threefold nature. The physical realm on one side and the spiritual on the other. And the mental is sandwiched in between. On the physical side of the mental realm, we have what the teachings call the self-body-mind. The self-body-mind only grasps things intellectually in a non-absorbent, separate, logical, literal, divided, polarized manner. Essentially, to the self-body-mind, everything is clearly categorized into two separate divisions. Things are either yes or no, or black or white, etc. Author's note, very much like a modern computer. And on the spiritual side of the mental realm, we have the oneness integration mind, which grasps things intuitively, as a whole, allowing us to understand abstract things. Our wheel functions between the two, like a pilot or captain of a ship, and allows us to act or think in any direction and utilize either aspect of the mental realm or both. Free will is our birthright. It is an inheritance, offspring of the Father, infinite, and the Mother, finite. Next, he discussed the vital importance of mere thoughts. Thoughts are the very building blocks of physical experience. Please contemplate in fullness the understanding profundity of this concept. Everything that humans have done or created came from the mental realm first. Everything you can think of. Try to think of even one thing that wasn't first thought of before it came into existence. A building. For someone had to conceive of the idea of a building, then someone had to want a building. Then they had to figure out the details of how it would be. Then the details of how it would be constructed. Every single thing that you can think of that is not from nature was first initiated in the mind. Don't take this lightly. You must realize it. not just intellectually grasp it. When you think about it, it is really like magic. Someone just thought of a building and in relatively very little time, really, it was there. It is magic, just a slower reacting form because it is dealing with a slower vibration realm. You must realize that also. Also realize then that anything you dwell on with your thoughts will become physical reality. Thinking about something first gives it birth. Then thinking of it again is nurturing it. It is a part of the process of bringing any thought or idea to fruition. First, you plant the mental seed. Then, if you water it by thinking about it from time to time, it will grow. If you don't tend to your plant, it will die. This works in our favor and against us, depending on what our plant is, and if we discipline our mind. If you have negative seeds, such as those planted by negative thoughts, emotions such as jealousy, the separate self will use your programming and emotions to consistently turn your thoughts to those seeds. This will provide constant nurturing. Thus, it will bring to bear negative fruits. What can you do to stop negative seeds or planting from thriving within you? You can only starve them out by using your will to discipline yourself and control your thoughts. Redirecting your thoughts towards the positive every time a negative thought arises. Unfortunately, when you are growing positive fruits, you do not have the advantage the negative side has. What do you mean by advantage? Asked the elder monk. Pythagoras, I believe that's how you pronounce his name. Apologies. I was just getting to that. The negative side has the advantage of the selfish, separate self using programming and strong emotions such as jealousy. This literally grabs your attention and thoughts, urging you to tend the negative seeds, to tend to the negative seeds. It also has habit on its side, with programming that unconsciously and automatically thinks, acts, and dwells negatively. To get positive seeds to grow, you must first overcome the negative emotions, programming, and etc. Plus, you need to work to create new habits, new programming. When you are planting positive seeds of virtue, such as becoming a more compassionate person, those too will come to fruition, but only if you discipline yourself to mentally tend your plants regularly. Remember, you are having to do this not only without benefit of already having positive programming, but rather having to reprogram against negative programming. So, oftentimes, making positive mental progress is far more arduous than just sitting back with the status quo, doing nothing, and letting the negative side run with the ball. You must really take control of your reins in order to change positively. How can one overcome such odds? I said. It seems a Herculean task that is so difficult as to be virtually impossible. It is not impossible, or I would not be standing here today. Certainly it is hard, but just because it is hard is no reason to give up or not to do it. And it can be made easier with the right training of thought patterns. It is a matter of developing a simple habit rather than consistently engaging in a struggle. In fact, you must not engage in a struggle, which I will explain in a moment. If you use your will to discipline yourself and control your thoughts, you can redirect your thoughts whenever your programming or emotions grab them from you to nurture negative seeds. If you stop watering and tending your negative plants, they will eventually die. That's all there is to it. But you cannot directly fight evil or negative thoughts and feelings. You will lose to it because the very nature of the fighting involves directing your thought energy towards the thing you are fighting. Your thought energy then feeds it, sustains it, even as you seemingly fight it. The only way to win is to starve out the negative by not thinking negative thoughts or even thinking about it at all, and by making progress in the positive, because when the positive grows, it takes up all the space and doesn't let the negative take root or grow. Just like maximized food gardening, if you plant the right groups of good plants and you keep them healthy, the negative plants won't grow. A person who is filled with unselfish love does not have selfish thoughts to fight against. There is simply no room for them to exist, and no soil for them to take root in. In such a manner does the mind grow or build all things in life. Free will is the construction supervisor of our lives. There was a novice student who had wandered into the chamber sometime during the lecture. I hadn't seen him before and didn't know his name. He was quite open and relaxed, though, and Michiel didn't seem to have any issue with his presence. Out of the blue, the gusty novice interjected a question. How do we ensure that what we are growing or building in life is always the right thing and will yield the right results? Good question, I thought to myself. While mind is the builder, will is the director of mental activities, kind of a construction boss. You can lend your will to either your selfish, separate self or your inner being. You can have positive thoughts or negative thoughts. You can be destructive or constructive. But only through using your will in harmony with universal will can you achieve lasting peace and bringing balance, oneness to the spiritual, mental, and physical. The universe has a will? The perplexed novice asked. Yes, the universe is a being of sorts. Not in the sense that you can understand now, but yes, it has a will. It also has a consciousness and a flow. It continues to function in incredible synchronization and harmony. Only humans have gone out of step with it. How do you know what is will or consciousness is? Different ways, young novice. You will learn more in other courses, son. This is actually a session for more advanced students, but you may stay. Perhaps everyone will learn more through your innocent presence. Universal consciousness can be further described as an awareness within each being. This awareness is ingrained or pre-built into the mind, and when awakened by the spiritual use of will, the person realizes their oneness with the universal spirit. This imprinted pattern is something like instinct. Like how a newborn infant already knows how to find a breast and how to nurse. Although it's far more sophisticated than mere animal instinct. Like instinct, it's already there inside you. It just takes the right stimulus to bring it out. It's the same with universal consciousness. If you want to awaken the imprinted pattern of that awareness, you just need the right stimulus. And in this case, the right stimulus is applying your free will unselfishly. When you grow enough in consciousness that you begin to make free will decisions that are unselfish, you trigger a response and you instinctively begin to discover a new awareness, your universal consciousness. Getting back to the basic concept of free will, Michelle, why do we have such a problem with using our free will in harmony with the will of God? I asked. The inner being in each of us is part of the universal spirit, and it thus represents universal will and wants us to follow it. Unfortunately, when most humans use or think about their free will, if they even think about it at all, they use it and consider it as a mean of doing anything but universal will. They think of it as a means of doing whatever their selfish separate self wants, regardless of universal will, God's will. And doing what the separate self wants is usually the opposite of universal will. The separate self does not like serving God. The separate self sees it as a sacrifice of its own will. So most people ignore universal will, use their free will to serve the separate self's will, and pay the resultant karmic price, which is for purpose of our discussion here, that we keep getting disillusioned and we keep suffering. But eventually find that only by doing the will of the universal spirit, by living in harmony with the universal will, can we live in happiness and peace. Finally, in time, some of us begin to realize that our real will is the will of the universal spirit, and that only by sticking to this do we return to paradise. When the synchronized of our free will with universal, when we synchronize our will with universal will, we then act only in ways that make positive karma. So basically, just be a good person, said the novice. Definitely yes, but this is a complex issue. And you are oversimplifying it. Acting in ways that create positive karma may not always have the appearance of doing something good. And doing something that appears to be good may not always create positive karma. It could even create negative karma. For instance, you could decide that being charitable is good. Giving away money to the poor is good. That certainly is good in general, but consider this. Let's say you come across a poor man lying in the cold street, and he holds out his hand to you silently, asking for money to help him. You have choices to make. How are you going to know what is best? If you are following the charitable route, you may give him a great deal of money, thinking you are doing the right thing. But there are many things you cannot know just by yourself, and you need universal guidance to really do the right thing. Sure, he might use that money to buy warm clothing, shelter, create a livelihood, and live happily ever after. But he also might use it to buy drugs or alcohol and end up in a stupor in which he gets harmed or killed, or even does so to someone else. On the other hand, maybe this man is psychologically set just so. And if instead of giving him anything, you were to scream an insult at him instead, perhaps he would say to himself, "That's it. I've had enough of this human degradation," and pick himself up out of his self-made hole and get himself work shoveling yank dung, then continuing to improve his condition and or himself, and ends up finally living happily ever after? So while yelling at him would have been the right thing to do, to someone who just saw you yelling at this poor man, it would appear that you were being cruel and heartless, not doing something good. Some of these things can be known by an enlightened being trained in prophecy, as you will be. But other things can only be known in the higher levels of consciousness outside the limits of our physical existence. "What do you mean?" the novice hastily said. "There is a hierarchy of beings that are beyond us in consciousness who have left the physical plane of Earth or were never part of it, all the way to the source of universal spirit. These include angels, enlightened and saintly beings, some of whom are our ancestors, and other great beings. They see and understand these things better than us because of their state of ascended consciousness, and are there to guide us if we surrender our reins to the universal will. Thus, we can only properly make such choices as the one in the example above. If we let our inner being with its universal consciousness guide us intuitively." The novice spoke again. "How do we get to such a state that we can be guided like that?" Humility and unselfish love will bring you to oneness with the all. There is nothing that can keep you from oneness with the universe but your separate self. Only through unselfish love can you make your will Only through unselfish love can you make your will one with the Infinite One. And by doing so, you will become a blessing to all who come in contact with you. For they will be coming in contact with truth, their own essential being, the one universal spirit. Okay, I'm going to stop there so I can upload this so it doesn't take forever. I'm on page 139, and we will start at the School of Prophets when I return. Thank you once again for taking the time to listen to me read The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis. I highly, highly recommend this book. I appreciate you listening to me read it. However, I really feel the importance of this book, that everyone should pick it up. Read it for yourself, reread it, and digest it, think on it, sleep on it, whatever it takes. Until then, I will continue reading and continue the challenge to myself to read a book. Okay? Until then,